Hey guys, tonight, we're leaving behind the stone castles of medieval Europe, the crowded streets of ancient Rome, and the towering pyramids of Egypt, to ride across one of the harshest landscapes on Earth, the endless grasslands of the Mongol Empire. When most people hear the word Mongol, they immediately think of Genghis Khan, fearsome horseman, and one of the greatest empires in human history. But very few people stop to ask a much simpler question: what if you weren't a famous warrior? What if you were just an ordinary person, trying to survive a single day? Because life on the Eurasian steppe was anything but easy. There were no supermarkets, no warm houses waiting at the end of the day, no soft beds, no paved roads. Your horse was your transportation, your family's wealth, and sometimes your only chance of staying alive. The weather could change in a matter of hours. One day the grasslands stretched peacefully to the horizon. The next, freezing winds swept across the open plains with almost nothing to stop them. Children learned to ride horses almost as soon as they could walk. Families packed their entire homes onto wagons whenever they moved. Food depended on the animals around you. Every decision mattered. And surviving required skills that most of us have never needed to learn. Tonight, we'll spend a full day living as an ordinary person inside the Mongol Empire. We'll wake up inside a traditional prepare food the Mongol way, ride across the endless steppe, meet traveling merchants, experience the strict discipline that shaped one of history's greatest civilizations, and discover why surviving here demanded strength, patience, and resilience every single day. So settle in. Find a comfortable position. Close your eyes if you'd like. And let's gently ride back more than 800 years to discover what life was really like in the vast and unforgettable Mongol Empire. The first thing you notice is not a city, it is silence, not the silence of an empty room, but the endless, breathing quiet of open land. The horizon stretches so far that the sky seems almost too large for the earth beneath it. Waves of feathered grass sway gently beneath a cool morning breeze, each blade catching the pale light of dawn before bending once again toward the soil. There are no towering walls to guide your eyes, no cathedral bells, no busy marketplaces, only grass, sky, and distance. For someone arriving from almost anywhere else in the medieval world, it feels strangely unsettling. You instinctively search for landmarks, yet there are almost none. The people who call this place home never needed stone roads or permanent streets. They learned instead to read the curve of distant hills, the direction of the wind, the stars above, and the memory of countless journeys carried across generations. To them, the steppe is not empty, it is alive. Every valley holds fresh grazing land, every stream promises water, every changing cloud whispers something about tomorrow's weather. You begin to understand that surviving here depends less on controlling nature and more on listening to it. A flock of birds glide silently overhead. Somewhere beyond a low ridge, horses snort softly as they graze, their tails lazily brushing away flies. The animals barely seem to notice your presence. They belong to families who have traveled these plains for centuries, following the rhythm of the seasons instead of the boundaries drawn on maps. A faint trail of smoke rises into the brightening sky. It leads toward a small cluster of white circular homes standing alone against the endless landscape. They seem almost fragile from this distance, yet appearances can be deceiving. These homes have crossed rivers, mountains, and vast plains. They can disappear before sunrise and reappear miles away before nightfall. Nothing here is built to remain forever. Everything is built to move. As you continue walking, the wind grows stronger. it carries the scent of dry grass, fresh milk, horsehair, and distant rain. Soon you will step into the life of an ordinary Mongol family. You will discover that comfort means something very different here, and as the morning slowly begins, your greatest challenge has not yet arrived, because surviving the Mongol Empire does not begin with grand adventures, it begins with simply making it through your very first morning. The morning arrives so quietly that, for a brief moment, you almost forget where you are. There is no rooster announcing the sunrise, no church bell echoing across a village, no neighbor stirring behind a wooden wall. Instead, you wake to the low murmur of the wind brushing against thick felt. It slides over the rounded walls of the GER with a soft, steady whisper, as though the steppe itself is breathing around you. The warmth beneath your blanket quickly begins to fade. Outside, the air is sharp enough to sting your nose. Someone is already awake. You hear slow footsteps circling the center of the home, followed by the gentle crackle of dried dung catching fire inside the iron stove. The smell surprises you. It is earthy rather than unpleasant, a scent that will cling to clothing, blankets, and memories alike. On these open grasslands, where forests are rare and firewood is precious, even the smallest flame must come from whatever the land is willing to provide. The family wastes nothing. As your eyes adjust to the dim light, you begin to notice how every object inside the GER has its place. Saddles hang neatly against the wooden lattice. Coiled ropes rest beside leather bags. A wooden chest holds the family's treasured belongings. There is no clutter here. Every possession must justify the effort of carrying it across hundreds of miles. You instinctively reach to stretch your stiff back. Immediately, someone offers a quiet smile, not because you slept well, because you managed to sleep at all. For someone born on the steppe, this life feels ordinary. For you, every movement reminds you that comfort has a different meaning here. The entrance flap lifts, cold morning light spills across the floor. It is time to begin. Outside, the world feels even larger than it did yesterday evening. A thin layer of frost still clings to the grass, sparkling beneath the rising sun. Beyond the camp, dozens of horses graze calmly, their breath drifting like pale clouds into the crisp air. You instinctively rub your hands together for warmth. No one else does. Years of living beneath these skies have taught them to move with the weather instead of resisting it. Children are already helping. One carefully carries a wooden bucket toward a mare waiting patiently nearby. Another gathers dried fuel from the previous day's collection. Even the youngest members of the family understand that every pair of hands matters. There is little room for idleness. Life begins with work. Breakfast arrives without ceremony. A wooden bowl is placed gently into your hands. Inside is warm milk, fresh from the herd, carrying a rich flavor unlike anything from a modern grocery store. It is thicker, slightly tangy, and deeply nourishing. Beside it rests a small piece of dried cheese. You take a careful bite. It is firm enough to challenge your teeth. The taste is salty, concentrated, almost startling at first. Yet you quickly realize it was never meant to be luxurious. It was created to survive long journeys, harsh winters, and uncertain seasons. Every meal tells the same quiet story. Food here is not chosen by craving, it is chosen by necessity. You glance across the endless plain. No fields of wheat stretch toward the horizon. No orchards sway in the breeze. The grass feeds the animals feed the people. That delicate chain supports nearly every life around you. Then the wind changes. Without warning, the pleasant morning becomes noticeably colder. Clouds drift across the sun. A moment ago the air felt gentle. Now it bites through your clothing. No one appears surprised. an older man simply tightens his heavy deal around his waist and continues repairing a saddle as though nothing has happened. The steppe owes no one consistency. You begin to understand that surviving here requires more than strength. It demands constant awareness. Every shift in the sky, every change in the wind, every unusual silence among the animals can carry meaning. Ignoring those signs can become a dangerous mistake. As the morning continues, you find yourself growing tired far sooner than expected. The altitude, the cold, the unfamiliar food, the endless openness, each one quietly drains your energy. You have done almost nothing by modern standards, yet your body already feels as though it has worked for hours, and that realization is perhaps the greatest surprise of all. The hardest part of life in the Mongol Empire is not surviving great battles or extraordinary adventures, it is waking up every single day and meeting the quiet demands of ordinary life. Around you, no one complains, they simply continue. Because this rhythm has shaped families for generations, becoming as natural as the sunrise itself. You watch a small child disappear between the horses with remarkable confidence, laughing softly as a foal follows close behind. There is something extraordinary about that simple moment. Here, childhood does not wait for adulthood to begin teaching responsibility. The lessons start almost as soon as little feet can keep pace with the herd, and before long, you will discover just how early life truly begins on the endless Mongol steppe. Morning has now settled comfortably across the steppe, the frost has disappeared beneath the warming sunlight, and the camp hums with a quiet rhythm that feels almost invisible until you stop and truly listen. Somewhere, sheep shuffle through the grass. A kettle gently simmers over the fire. Leather creaks as someone tightens the straps of a saddle. Nothing feels hurried, yet nothing is delayed. It is here that you begin to notice something unexpected. The children are not watching the adults work, they are working beside them. At first glance, a Mongol childhood might seem remarkably free. There are no towering schoolhouses, no crowded classrooms, no shelves lined with books waiting to be memorized. The open steppe is their playground, stretching farther than the eye can see. But freedom here carries responsibility. From the moment a child can walk with confidence, they begin learning the quiet skills that keep an entire family alive. A little girl no older than 5 carefully gathers dried dung into a woven basket. She moves with practiced patience, selecting only the pieces dry enough to burn well. It is hardly glamorous work, but without fuel there will be no warm meals, and no warmth when winter arrives. Nearby, 2 young boys help guide a small flock of goats toward fresh grazing land. They carry no sense of complaint. To them, these simple tasks are as ordinary as breathing. No one waits until adulthood to become useful. Every season teaches another lesson. Every lesson carries purpose. You begin to understand that growing up on the steppe is less about age and more about trust. The adults rarely explain every detail. Instead, children learn by watching. They imitate, they fail, they try again. Patient guidance replaces long speeches. The land itself becomes their greatest teacher. One afternoon, an older grandmother kneels beside a young child, showing careful hands how to mend a torn leather strap using bone needles and strong thread. Her voice remains soft, almost lost beneath the wind, but every movement carries generations of experience. Nothing is rushed, mistakes are expected, persistence matters far more than perfection. Stories become another classroom. When evening approaches and the day's work begins to slow, families gather inside the GER. Flames flicker gently in the center while shadows dance across the felt walls. The oldest members begin to speak. Not with written history, but with memory, they tell stories of distant migrations, clever ancestors, unusual winters, faithful horses, and travelers who crossed land so vast they seemed almost endless. Some tales carry wisdom, others simply bring quiet laughter after a long day. Children, listen carefully. These stories are more than entertainment, they are maps of experience passed from one generation to the next. In a world where few people can read, memory becomes one of the greatest treasures a family possesses. Outside, the wind continues its endless journey across the grasslands. Inside, another lesson quietly unfolds. Respect is never demanded through fear alone, it is earned through example. The youngest watch how their parents greet visitors with generosity, even when supplies are limited. They observe how elders receive the place of honor inside the GER. They notice when voices remain calm during disagreement. These habits become invisible threads that hold the family together. You may find yourself missing the comforts of your own childhood. Perhaps you think of warm bedrooms, shelves of toys, or afternoons free from responsibility, yet the children around you seem neither unhappy nor burdened. Their joy appears in different places: a race across the open plains, the birth of a healthy lamb, a game played with carved bones. The arrival of relatives after many weeks apart. Happiness here grows from shared effort rather than endless possessions. As the sun begins its slow descent, a young boy proudly carries a bucket almost too heavy for his small arms. Some water spills along the way. No one scolds him. His father simply smiles, takes the bucket for a moment, and hands it back so the boy can finish the journey himself. Confidence, you realize, is built one small success at a time. Looking across the camp, you begin to understand why outsiders often underestimated these families. They saw only simple tents upon empty grasslands. They failed to see generations of knowledge being quietly passed from parent to child every single day. The strength of the Mongol Empire did not begin on distant battlefields, it began here, in ordinary families, where every child slowly learned that survival depended not only on courage, but on patience, observation, kindness, and responsibility. And among all the lessons waiting ahead, perhaps none would shape a young life more completely than the one that seemed almost impossible to imagine, for very soon, you would discover that before a Mongol child ever learned to read a single word, they first learned to ride a horse. The evening stories linger in your thoughts long after the fire has faded. As dawn slowly returns to the steppe, another day begins much as the last one ended, quietly, without fanfare. A cool breeze sweeps across the grasslands, carrying with it the scent of wild sage, damp earth, and horses already awake before the sun has fully climbed above the horizon. You step outside the GER expecting another peaceful morning. Instead, you witness one of the most remarkable sights in the Mongol world. A child, no older than 4, rides past you. The pony beneath him is small, sturdy, and calm. His legs barely reach the animal's sides, yet he sits with astonishing confidence. He is not showing off. No one stops to admire him. The adults continue with their work as though nothing unusual has happened, because here, this is ordinary. For most people today, learning to ride a horse is a hobby, something reserved for special occasions or leisurely afternoons. On the Mongol steppe, it is as essential as learning to walk. Long before children could recognize written symbols or count distant years, they learned balance, they learned trust, and they learned that a horse was never simply an animal. It was a companion whose steady heartbeat often meant the difference between safety and danger. You watch as an older sister gently helps her younger brother climb onto another pony. There is no expensive saddle decorated for ceremony. Only practical leather, worn smooth by years of use. The boy wobbles for a moment. His sister says nothing. She simply places one steady hand on the pony's neck. The animal remains perfectly still. Slowly, The child finds his balance, only then does the pony begin to walk. No applause follows, no celebration. This lesson has been repeated thousands of mornings across generations. Confidence grows quietly here. Not through dramatic achievements, but through countless ordinary moments. As the sun rises higher, several children guide the small horses beyond the camp. An elderly man follows at a distance, never interfering unless truly needed. He understands something that cannot easily be taught with words. A rider must learn to feel the horse, to notice every shift beneath the saddle, the tightening of muscles, the flick of an ear, the slight hesitation before crossing uneven ground. The horse speaks constantly, only patient riders learn its language. Hours pass gently, the children practice turning, stopping, and guiding their ponies across shallow streams and gentle hills. Sometimes one slips awkwardly to the ground. No one rushes over in panic. The child simply stands, brushes away the dust, and climbs back into the saddle. Falling is expected, remaining afraid is the greater danger. You begin to understand why Mongol riders would one day become legendary across continents. Their education started before memory itself seemed fully formed. By adulthood, thousands upon thousands of hours had already been spent in the saddle. Riding was no longer a skill, it had become instinct. The horses themselves seem almost astonishingly patient, unlike the towering breeds many imagine today. These steppe horses are compact, muscular, and incredibly resilient. Thick coats protect them from bitter winters. Strong legs carry them across astonishing distances with little complaint. Even when grazing, they remain alert. Always listening, always aware. In many ways, they resemble the people who depend upon them. Neither wastes unnecessary energy. Both have learned to endure. As midday approaches, one young girl guides her pony toward a small flock of sheep wandering farther than they should. She barely raises her voice. Instead, she positions her horse carefully. Together, horse and rider gently influence the flock back toward safer ground. The task appears effortless, yet every movement reflects years of quiet practice. You realize something surprising. These children are not mastering horses through force. They are building partnerships. Trust grows slowly between rider and animal, shaped by patience rather than fear. Perhaps that is why the horses remain so calm even in unfamiliar situations. They know the voices, the hands, the rhythm of the families they have served for years. The afternoon breeze grows warmer. Your own legs feel tired after walking across the uneven ground. Meanwhile, children continue riding as naturally as if they had never known another way to move through the world. For them, distance has a different meaning. A journey of many miles is simply part of an ordinary day. Looking across the endless grasslands, you begin to understand why roads mattered so little here. The horses carried not only people, but stories, families, traditions, and entire ways of life across landscapes that seemed almost without end. And when evening finally returns, both riders and horses drift quietly back toward the waiting camp. The white shores appear once again against the fading horizon, glowing softly beneath the golden light of sunset. Soon, you will step inside one for yourself. Only then will you discover that behind its simple felt walls lies a home carefully designed to withstand one of the harshest environments on Earth, while offering a quiet comfort that outsiders rarely expected. The last rays of sunlight slip quietly below the horizon. The riders have returned. The horses graze peacefully beyond the camp, their silhouettes blending into the sea of tall grass as evening settles across the steppe. The wind, which carried so many sounds throughout the day, begins to soften, leaving behind a stillness that feels almost sacred. Ahead of you stands the family's GER. From a distance it seems surprisingly simple, a low, circular home covered in thick layers of white felt, standing alone beneath an endless sky. There are no stone walls, no chimneys reaching upward, no heavy wooden doors guarded by iron locks. Compared to the castles of Europe or the crowded homes of distant cities, it appears almost temporary, and yet, as you step closer, you begin to understand that appearances rarely tell the whole story. The wooden door opens with a quiet creak. Warmth immediately greets you, not overwhelming warmth, but the comforting kind that gently pushes away the evening chill. After spending the day beneath open skies, even this modest shelter feels remarkably inviting. You pause just inside the entrance. The first thing you notice is the shape. Everything is round. The walls curve gracefully around you, built from a lattice of carefully crafted wooden frames that can be folded flat whenever the family moves. Above, long roof poles stretch upward like the ribs of an enormous umbrella, meeting at a circular opening in the center. Through that opening, the first stars are beginning to appear. Smoke from the fire drifts upward, escaping into the darkening sky. The ceiling seems to connect the family directly with the heavens above. Nothing here feels accidental. Every part of the GER has been refined over countless generations of life on the steppe. The thick felt covering traps precious warmth during bitter winters. In summer, sections can be lifted to invite cooling breezes inside. The structure is strong enough to withstand powerful winds, yet light enough to be dismantled within a few hours. An entire home, ready to travel whenever the grass demands it. You slowly turn in place. Although the space is modest, it never feels cramped. Each object occupies a meaningful place. Brightly painted wooden chests line one side of the wall, protecting clothing, treasured possessions, and family heirlooms. Saddles hang neatly nearby, polished by years of daily use. Coiled ropes, leather bags, wooden buckets, and carefully folded blankets all rest exactly where they belong. There is no wasted space. Nor is there unnecessary decoration. Beauty comes through craftsmanship rather than excess. Near the center burns a small iron stove. Its steady fire serves many purposes at once. It provides warmth, it cooks meals, it dries damp clothing after unexpected rain. It becomes the quiet heart around which the family gathers each evening. Without it, the GER would simply be another shelter. With it, it becomes a home. You are invited to sit. Almost instinctively, you choose the nearest empty place. A gentle smile spreads across the face of the family's eldest woman. Without saying a word, she motions for you to move slightly. Only then do you realize that every area inside the GER carries meaning. The northern side is reserved for honored guests and respected elders. Family members traditionally occupy different places according to age and responsibility. Even in this peaceful home, quiet customs guide everyday life. No signs announce these traditions. Everyone simply knows them. As darkness deepens outside, conversation begins to replace the sounds of work. Voices remain calm. Laughter comes easily. Children listen more than they speak, though their eyes sparkle whenever a familiar story begins. The fire flickers gently, casting golden light across painted beams and woven fabrics. The walls seem almost alive as shadows dance across them. Outside, the wind continues its endless journey over the grasslands. Inside, time feels slower, safer. You notice something else. There are no separate bedrooms, no private spaces hidden behind doors. Life unfolds together. Families sleep, eat, work, celebrate, and endure hardship within the same shared circle. Perhaps that closeness explains the quiet understanding between generations. Every joy, every disagreement, every lesson is witnessed together. Before long, thick blankets are spread neatly across the floor. Beds appear almost as if by magic. the same room that welcomed guests now transforms into a peaceful place of rest. Nothing is fixed, everything adapts. It is the same quiet wisdom that shapes every part of life on the steppe. As you settle beneath warm layers of wool, your eyes drift upward once more toward the smoke hole above. Beyond it, countless stars shimmer in the night sky. Somewhere outside, horses shift softly in the darkness. A dog lets out a distant bark before silence returns once again. You begin to understand that the GER is far more than a tent. It is a carefully balanced world, portable, practical, and deeply connected to the land that surrounds it. Tomorrow morning, however, another lesson awaits, because no matter how comfortable this home may feel, its people survive not because of the shelter around them, but because of what fills the bowls placed before them each day. And as dawn approaches once more, you will discover what it truly meant to eat on the endless grasslands of the Mongol Empire. Morning arrives with a quiet familiarity now, the soft rustle of felt walls, the gentle crackle of the fire, the distant sound of horses moving across dew-covered grass. The rhythm of life on the steppe no longer feels entirely foreign. You are beginning to wake with the land instead of against it, yet as the comforting warmth of the GER slowly fades behind you, another lesson quietly unfolds. No matter how beautiful these endless grasslands may appear, beauty cannot be eaten. Out here, survival depends upon what the land is willing to give, and the land gives very little. You step outside just as the eastern sky begins to glow with pale shades of gold. The camp is already awake. Not because anyone is rushing, but because animals keep their own schedule, and people have learned to follow it. A young woman kneels beside a mare, resting a wooden bucket beneath her with practiced ease. Her movements are calm and unhurried. The horse stands peacefully, accustomed to this familiar morning ritual. Drop by drop, fresh milk fills the bucket. Nearby, goats bleat softly while sheep wander through the morning mist. Every animal has a purpose, and every purpose helps sustain the family. On the Mongol steppe, livestock are more than possessions. They are the pantry, the wardrobe, the source of warmth, and often the difference between life and hardship. Breakfast is simple. A steaming wooden bowl is placed into your hands once again. This time, you pause before taking the first sip. The rich, slightly sour flavor no longer surprises you. Instead, it carries a quiet sense of comfort. Food here does not seek to impress. It seeks to endure. Beside the bowl rests a piece of dried curd, hard enough to last for weeks, sometimes even months. At first, it seems almost impossible to chew. Then you realize that is precisely the point. Food must survive long journeys just as people do. Nothing is prepared only for today. Everything is made with tomorrow in mind. As the morning continues, you watch several women carefully strain fresh milk into large leather containers. Some of it will become yogurt. Some will be transformed into butter. Some will be fermented into drinks shared during celebrations or offered generously to guests. Very little is wasted. Even the smallest amount of milk carries value. Patience becomes an invisible ingredient in every meal. Nothing happens quickly. The wind drifts gently across the camp, carrying scents that have become strangely familiar. Warm milk, dry grass, wood smoke, fresh leather. Together, they create the quiet perfume of nomadic life. By midday, preparations begin for the day's main meal. A large pot hangs above the fire. Inside, pieces of mutton slowly simmer with little more than water and a pinch of salt. There are no elaborate spices arriving from distant kingdoms, no overflowing gardens filled with vegetables, no fragrant loaves of freshly baked bread. The simplicity may surprise you, yet each bite provides exactly what the body needs after hours spent riding, walking, and working beneath an enormous sky. You notice something else: meals are rarely eaten alone. Family members gather close together, passing wooden bowls from hand to hand. Guests are welcomed without hesitation. Even travelers who arrive unexpectedly may be offered food before questions are asked. Hospitality carries enormous importance here. On the open steppe, generosity often returns when it is needed most. Someday your own family may depend upon the kindness of strangers. As afternoon fades toward evening, strips of meat are carefully hung where the dry wind can preserve them naturally. There are no modern kitchens, no refrigeration. Instead, the climate itself becomes part of the cooking process. Cold winters freeze food, dry winds preserve it. Experience teaches families exactly how nature can become an ally. You begin to realize that eating in the Mongol Empire is less about recipes than about understanding seasons. Every summer offers preparation for winter. Every successful harvest of animal products provides hope for months still unseen. Even the bones left behind after a meal are treated with respect. Many become tools, others feed dogs that guard the camp through the night. Almost nothing disappears without serving another purpose. As the evening meal comes to an end, the fire burns lower. Children grow sleepy. Adults speak softly while repairing harnesses or sewing worn clothing beneath the warm glow of the stove. Outside, countless stars slowly emerge above the silent grasslands. You feel satisfied, not because the meal was luxurious, but because it carried the quiet assurance that another day had been met with care and wisdom. Still, one thought lingers in your mind: what happens when the seasons no longer cooperate? What happens when the comforting warmth of summer gives way to a winter so fierce that even the strongest families begin to worry? The bowls may still be full tonight, but beyond the peaceful darkness, the steppe is already preparing its next great challenge, and soon, you will discover why the weather itself was one of the most relentless forces anyone in the Mongol Empire would ever face. The evening meal leaves a welcome warmth behind, but only for a little while. Outside, the endless grasslands are already changing. The last light of the sun slips beneath the distant horizon, painting the sea of dry grass in quiet shades of amber before surrendering everything to blue-gray twilight. The wind, gentle only moments ago, begins to whisper across the open plain, and you quickly discover that the weather here is never something to ignore. You might imagine wide grasslands as peaceful places. Calm. Predictable. Even comforting, but the Mongol steppe has little interest in being comfortable. Here, the sky is the true ruler, without forests to soften the wind or mountains to shelter the plains. Every shift in the air is felt immediately. A breeze can become a bitter gale before you've finished tying your boots. Thick clouds may gather where only clear skies existed that morning. The land stretches so far in every direction that storms seem to appear out of nowhere, rolling across the horizon with quiet determination. For the people who call this place home, reading the weather becomes as natural as breathing. Long before the first raindrop falls, experienced eyes notice tiny signs: horses lifting their heads toward the wind, birds changing direction, the scent of damp earth drifting through otherwise dry air. These small clues matter. They offer precious minutes to prepare. Gather animals, tighten ropes around the GER, and protect anything that cannot be replaced. The seasons rarely offer mercy. Spring awakens the grasslands with fresh green life, but it also transforms frozen rivers into dangerous currents. Heavy rains can turn familiar paths into fields of thick mud where wagons struggle to move. Lambs and foals are born during these weeks, making the survival of every young animal a quiet concern shared by the entire family. Then comes summer. The days stretch endlessly beneath a brilliant sun. Heat rises from the earth until the distant horizon shimmers like water that isn't really there. Dust clings to your boots, your clothes, even your eyelashes. Water becomes more valuable with every passing hour, and both people and animals must travel carefully between reliable streams and wells, yet even during the hottest afternoons, comfort remains temporary. As darkness approaches, temperatures fall with surprising speed. The same land that baked beneath the sun now asks for thick felt clothing and carefully tended fires. You learn never to trust the warmth of midday. Night always has its own plans. Autumn arrives quietly, carrying golden grass that sways beneath an ever-cooling breeze. Families begin preparing for the months ahead. Extra fuel is gathered. Felt coverings are repaired. Meat is preserved while conditions remain favorable. Every task is performed with calm purpose because everyone understands the same truth: winter is coming, and winter on the Mongol steppe is remembered long after it has passed. Snow does not always arrive gently. Sometimes fierce winds drive it sideways across the plains until earth and sky seem to disappear into a single sheet of white. Travelers lose familiar landmarks. Herds huddle together instinctively, turning their backs against the relentless wind. Inside the GER, life grows quieter. The fire becomes the heart of the home. Its soft crackling filling the silence while family members sit close together beneath heavy felt blankets. Outside, the wind continues its endless song, rattling the wooden frame and reminding everyone that survival often depends on staying exactly where they are. Some winters become especially cruel. A devastating season known today as a dud could leave deep snow covering the grazing lands or thick ice trapping the grass beneath it. Livestock, unable to reach food, weaken day after day. Entire herds might vanish before spring returned. For families whose lives depended upon those animals, such winters tested not only endurance, but hope itself. Yet the remarkable thing is not that these hardships existed, it is that people adapted to them. Generations learned to move before pastures became exhausted. They bred resilient animals suited to the climate. They built homes that could withstand powerful winds while remaining warm inside. They carried knowledge passed quietly from parents to children. Not through books, but through countless seasons lived beneath this enormous sky. As you settle beneath your blankets once more, listening to the wind circle gently around the GER, you begin to understand that surviving the weather is never about defeating nature. It is about learning to live alongside it, and nowhere is that partnership more visible than in the faithful companions waiting patiently outside, because with the coming dawn, you'll discover why every horse in the Mongol Empire was worth far more than gold. Morning arrives quietly. The bitter winds that circled the GER through the night have softened, leaving the steppe wrapped in a cool silence. Dew clings to the long grass, sparkling for only a few precious moments before the rising sun begins to warm the earth. As the family stirs awake, no one rushes toward breakfast first. No one lingers by the fire. Instead, nearly every pair of eyes turns in the same direction, toward the horses. To someone arriving from a distant land, this might seem unusual. You might assume the animals are simply transportation, useful for traveling from one place to another. But after spending time here, that idea begins to feel far too small. A horse is not merely something you own. It is woven into every part of life. Before the morning meal is finished, someone has already walked among the herd, quietly checking each animal. A young foal stays close to its mother. An older gelding grazes calmly. Another horse stamps at flies, its thick mane shifting gently in the breeze. Nothing appears remarkable, yet every small detail matters. A missing horse is noticed immediately, an injured horse becomes everyone's concern. Without them, the rhythm of life slows to a crawl, the grasslands stretch farther than the eye can follow. Villages are rare. Distances that seem manageable from afar become exhausting once your feet touch the open plain. Walking everywhere simply isn't practical. The horse transforms impossible journeys into ordinary days, need fresh water from a distant spring, ride, need to gather scattered livestock before sunset, ride, need to carry supplies to relatives camped many miles away, ride. The horse shortens the endless horizon. Children begin learning this lesson almost before they can fully understand words. At first they cling carefully to an older rider, their tiny hands gripping tightly as the horse moves with slow, patient steps. Before long, they sit alone, discovering balance through countless small mistakes rather than formal instruction. Falling is expected, getting back on is simply part of growing up. The bond between rider and horse is built over years of quiet familiarity. Each animal has its own temperament. Some are curious, others stubborn. A few seem remarkably calm even when sudden winds sweep across the plains. Experienced riders recognize these personalities as easily as they recognize members of their own family. They know which horse is best suited for long journeys, which one moves steadily across rocky ground, which mare can always find her way home even after traveling unfamiliar paths. Trust grows slowly, and once earned, it becomes difficult to separate rider from companion. The horses themselves are perfectly adapted to this demanding world. They are smaller than many modern breeds, yet astonishingly resilient. Thick coats protect them during freezing winters, while powerful legs carry them across rivers, hills, and open grasslands without hesitation. Even when snow blankets the earth, they possess an extraordinary habit. Using their hooves, they scrape away layers of snow to uncover hidden grass beneath. That simple instinct often means survival. Unlike animals requiring carefully stored feed, Mongol horses remain remarkably independent, finding nourishment where others might perish. For families constantly moving across vast landscapes, this resilience is priceless. Milk, too, becomes another quiet gift. Mares provide the milk used to make airag, the lightly fermented drink shared during ordinary days and special gatherings alike. Nothing is wasted. Every part of the relationship between people and horse serves a purpose built through generations of experience, yet perhaps the greatest gift cannot be measured. It is freedom. Standing beside your horse, the endless steppe suddenly feels smaller, more familiar. Hills that once seemed distant invite exploration. Rivers become crossings rather than barriers. The open sky no longer feels overwhelming, instead, it feels like home. Travelers from distant kingdoms often marveled at how quickly Mongol riders could cover astonishing distances. Messages, supplies, and news crossed enormous stretches of land because both horse and rider understood each other with remarkable ease. There were no elaborate saddles covered in decoration, no unnecessary display. Practicality guided every choice. Leather reins worn smooth by years of use, simple wooden stirrups, sturdy saddlebags carrying only what was needed. Every item reflected a life where excess only added weight. As the morning grows brighter, you gently stroke the neck of the horse waiting patiently beside you. Its warm breath drifts into the cool air. It asks for little: fresh pasture, clean water, steady care. In return, it offers something beyond price: movement. Companionship, security, a chance to survive a land that asks much from everyone who enters it. You climb into the saddle once more, and together you begin riding across the endless sea of grass. The rhythm of steady hooves blends with the whispering wind, carrying you toward another lesson hidden beyond the horizon, because in the Mongol Empire, strength was never shaped by weather alone, it was also forged through discipline, respect, and the quiet expectations that guided every family from one generation to the next. The steady rhythm of your horse carries you across the open grasslands, hour after hour. The endless horizon barely seems to move. The wind hums softly through the tall grass, and for a moment, the steppe feels almost effortless. Freedom seems to stretch as far as the sky itself, but that feeling can be deceiving. Life here is not held together by endless space alone. It survives because every person understands where they belong, what is expected of them, and why even the smallest responsibilities matter. The vast Mongol Empire may have appeared wild to distant travelers, but beneath its open skies existed a quiet order that shaped everyday life. You begin to notice it in the smallest moments. As the family prepares to stop beside a shallow stream, no one waits to be told what to do. One person gathers water. Another begins unpacking cooking pots. The older children watch the herd while the younger ones collect dry dung for the evening fire. No commands echo across the camp. Everyone simply knows. These habits were not learned in a single afternoon. They were woven into childhood, repeated through countless ordinary days until they became as natural as breathing. There was little room for idleness on the steppe. The land offered many gifts, but only to those willing to meet its demands. If someone neglected a simple task, forgetting to secure a rope before a storm, leaving a gate open, or failing to notice an injured animal, the consequences could affect the entire family. Responsibility was never viewed as a burden. It was an act of care. Respect, too, carried enormous weight. Children were expected to listen carefully when elders spoke, not out of fear alone, but because experience could mean the difference between safety and hardship. An older shepherd had watched more winters arrive. A grandmother remembered where fresh water remained during dry seasons. A father understood which valleys offered shelter when the wind turned dangerous. Knowledge was treated like a treasured inheritance. It deserved patience. Around the evening fire, stories became quiet lessons disguised as conversation. A tale about a lost traveler reminded listeners never to wander alone. A memory of a difficult winter encouraged careful preparation before the first snowfall. Even humorous stories often carried gentle warnings hidden beneath smiles. Nobody announced that a lesson was beginning. Life itself became the teacher. Visitors occasionally noticed another remarkable quality. Arguments rarely lasted long. Disagreements certainly happened. Families are families, no matter the century. But allowing anger to grow unchecked served little purpose when everyone depended upon one another. Tomorrow's journey still had to be made. The animals still needed tending. The fire still required fuel. Cooperation was not merely encouraged, it was essential. Among the Mongols, loyalty reached beyond the walls of a single ger. Extended families traveled together. Clans shared resources during difficult seasons. Trusted friendships often lasted generations. A promise carried great value because survival itself rested upon reliable relationships. To break trust was no small matter. It echoed far beyond one conversation. Children learned honesty through example rather than constant punishment. When mistakes happened, and they always did, they were expected to accept responsibility instead of hiding the truth. A broken tool could be repaired, a lost animal might eventually be found, but trust, once damaged, required far longer to mend. Discipline also appeared in quieter ways. Meals followed familiar rhythms. Equipment was carefully maintained after every journey. Saddles were inspected before long rides. Clothing was repaired before small tears became large ones. Nothing useful was neglected. Waste was avoided not because it was fashionable, but because replacing even ordinary possessions could require weeks or months of effort. Foreign visitors sometimes mistook this way of life for harshness, yet within the discipline existed surprising warmth. Parents laughed with their children, neighbors welcomed weary travelers, songs drifted through evening camps while elders shared stories beneath countless stars. Order did not erase kindness, instead, it made kindness possible. When every person carried their share of responsibility, there was more room for generosity. As darkness settles once again across the grasslands, the family finishes their evening tasks almost without speaking. The horses rest nearby. The fire crackles gently. Above, the sky fills with more stars than you could ever hope to count. No written schedule guided this peaceful rhythm, no clock measured the passing hours, only habits, practiced across generations until they became part of who these people were. Sitting quietly beside the fading fire, you begin to understand that the true strength of the Mongol Empire was never built by powerful leaders alone. It began here, inside ordinary families, where discipline was passed from parent to child as naturally as the changing seasons, and as sleep slowly begins to settle over the camp. Your eyes drift upward toward the endless heavens, where tomorrow's lesson will unfold beneath a sky so vast that it seems to stretch beyond the edge of time itself. Night settles over the steppe so gently that you almost fail to notice the moment daylight disappears. One by one, the familiar colors of the grasslands fade into soft shades of blue and silver. The distant hills become little more than quiet silhouettes, while the great sky above slowly reveals thousands of stars, each one brighter than the last. There are no city lights to compete with them, no distant villages glowing on the horizon, only an endless blanket of darkness stretching farther than your imagination can follow. For perhaps the first time in your life, you understand what true silence sounds like. It is never completely still. The breeze continues its slow journey across the plains, carrying the gentle rustle of grass. Somewhere nearby, a horse shifts its weight with a soft snort. Sheep huddle together, their faint murmurs drifting through the cool air. Every sound feels small beneath the immense sky, yet together they form a quiet lullaby that has echoed across these grasslands for countless generations. The day's work has come to an end, the cooking pot has been cleaned. The herd has settled. The fire outside burns lower with each passing moment, glowing like a lonely star upon the earth. One by one, family members step inside the GER, careful not to leave warmth behind for too long. You follow them. Crossing the low doorway requires a slight bow, a simple movement that reminds every visitor to enter with respect. Inside, the familiar scent of felt, wood, leather, and smoke welcomes you once again. It is modest, but after a full day beneath the open sky, it feels remarkably comforting. The fire at the center burns softly, its light dances across the curved wooden walls, creating slow-moving shadows that seem almost alive. Blankets made from thick wool and felt are carefully arranged for the night. There are no separate bedrooms. No heavy furniture filling the space. Everything has its place, everything serves a purpose. Even after sunset, small tasks continue quietly. A boot left too close to the fire is gently moved aside. Riding gear is checked before morning. Water is covered to keep it clean. These habits have become second nature, performed almost without thought. Outside, the wind rises once more. It brushes against the felt walls with a low whisper, reminding everyone that the steppe never truly sleeps. Yet the GER answers with quiet confidence. Its circular shape guides the wind around rather than against it, while its thick layers of felt hold the day's warmth inside. Simple, practical, remarkably effective. As the fire settles into glowing embers, conversation grows softer. An elder recalls a distant journey taken many summers ago, when the grass reached nearly to a horse's knees. A child asks whether the stars have names. Someone quietly hums an old melody without feeling the need to finish the song. Not every silence needs to be filled. In a world without glowing screens or endless distractions, darkness invites reflection rather than impatience. You find yourself looking upward through the smoke hole at the center of the roof. The stars appear framed by the wooden circle above, slowly drifting as the earth turns beneath them. For Mongol families, the heavens are more than beautiful. They help mark the seasons, guide long journeys, and remind travelers that no matter how far they roam, the same sky always watches overhead. There is comfort in that thought. Far from crowded cities and towering walls, people here measure time differently. Sunrise begins the day. Sunset gently ends it. The changing moon, the movement of constellations, and the return of familiar seasons quietly shape the rhythm of life. Nothing feels rushed. Even sleep arrives gradually. The fire grows dimmer. The warmth of the blankets begins to chase away the evening chill. Outside, the horses remain close, their presence offering quiet reassurance. Somewhere beyond the darkness, wolves may still roam these vast plains, but tonight they remain only distant voices carried by the wind. The family rests without fear. They trust the strength of their home. They trust one another, and perhaps most importantly, they trust the land they have spent generations learning to understand. Your eyes begin to grow heavy. The endless sky that once seemed overwhelming now feels strangely protective, like a great silent roof stretching across the world itself. The whispers of the wind become softer. The crackling embers fade into gentle silence, and the long journey of this single day slowly comes to rest. But with the coming dawn, another story quietly waits to unfold. As the first rays of sunlight return to the grasslands, you'll discover that the heartbeat of every Mongol camp was not shaped by men alone. It was also carried by women, whose strength, wisdom, and quiet leadership held families together beneath these endless skies. The first light of dawn slips quietly across the horizon. Long before the sun has fully climbed into the sky, movement has already begun within the camp. The fire is gently coaxed back to life, its first curls of smoke rising through the circular opening above. Horses graze peacefully beyond the GER, while the cool morning air carries the scent of fresh grass still covered in dew. As you step outside, you begin to notice something you may have overlooked yesterday. The camp does not awaken through loud commands or hurried voices. It awakens through quiet purpose, and much of that purpose begins with the women. If you arrived expecting women of the Mongol Empire to spend their lives hidden in the background, the steppe quickly asks you to think again. Life here leaves little room for anyone to remain idle. Every capable pair of hands helps keep the family alive, and women stand at the very center of that delicate balance. The morning unfolds with a familiar rhythm. One woman milks the mares with practiced hands, collecting the fresh milk that will later become irag. Another prepares the first meal of the day, tending the fire while children quietly gather nearby. An older grandmother carefully repairs a felt blanket, every careful stitch extending its usefulness through another demanding season. None of these tasks appear grand, yet each one quietly supports everything else. Without warm clothing, winter becomes dangerous. Without preserved food, long journeys become uncertain. Without clean water, illness can spread through an entire camp. the strength of a family often depends upon work that few outsiders ever notice. When the time comes to move, that strength becomes even more remarkable. You have already seen how an entire home can be packed onto wagons. But now you watch the process unfold with fresh eyes. The felt coverings are rolled with practiced efficiency. Wooden frames are carefully dismantled. Cooking tools, blankets, storage chests, and household belongings are packed with astonishing precision. Within a surprisingly short time, the place that felt like a permanent home has disappeared from the grasslands, and much of this careful organization is guided by the women. They know exactly where every object belongs, not because anyone has written instructions, but because generations have quietly passed this knowledge from mother to daughter. Children learn simply by watching. A little girl carefully imitates her mother's movements while folding felt cloth. A young boy helps carry wooden poles without being asked twice. Lessons arrive naturally, woven into ordinary moments rather than formal teaching. Responsibility grows slowly, almost unnoticed. Women also played an important role in managing the family's wealth. On the steppe, wealth was measured less by coins than by healthy animals. Sheep, goats, horses, camels, and cattle all required careful attention. Decisions about dairy production, food storage, household supplies, and daily resources often rested in experienced hands that understood exactly what the family needed to survive each changing season. Visitors from distant kingdoms sometimes found this surprising. In many parts of the medieval world, women held far fewer responsibilities outside the home, but here, the home itself was never separate from the wider world. The entire camp depended upon capable leadership. Sometimes, when men traveled for hunting, trade, or military service, women managed nearly every aspect of daily life. Camps continued moving. Herds remained healthy. Children were raised. Supplies were carefully rationed. Life simply continued, with quiet confidence. History even remembers remarkable Mongol women who advised rulers, governed territories, and protected the stability of the empire during uncertain times. Though their names are often overshadowed by famous conquerors, their influence reached far beyond the walls of any single ger. Power did not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it appeared through patience, through wisdom, through the steady ability to keep an entire family moving forward. As the afternoon sun slowly begins its descent, laughter drifts across the camp. Children chase one another through the grass while an elderly woman smiles quietly, continuing her work without interruption. Nearby, another woman hums a melody as she stirs a pot above the fire. The scene feels wonderfully ordinary, and perhaps that is its greatest lesson. History often remembers kings, generals, and battles, but ordinary days are built by ordinary people. The women of the Mongol Empire shaped countless mornings like this one, creating homes wherever the wagon stopped, preserving traditions without written books, and offering stability in a world that never stood still for long. As evening approaches once more, merchants begin appearing on the distant horizon, their long caravans moving like tiny shadows across the endless sea of grass. They carry silk, spices, precious metals, stories from lands you can scarcely imagine, and tomorrow, you'll discover how the Mongol Empire became the bridge that connected worlds through the great trade routes stretching across continents. The evening light from the previous camp slowly dissolves into memory, and with the coming dawn, the world feels larger again. The steppe stretches endlessly in every direction, but today something different moves across it. Not just a family, not just a herd, but distant shapes appearing on the horizon, long, patient lines that seem to grow out of the land itself. Caravans. At first, they are little more than shadows against the rising sun. But as they draw closer, their presence becomes clearer. Camels walking in steady rhythm. Horses carrying packed goods. Men and women wrapped in travel-worn clothing that has seen many climates, many borders, many nights beneath unfamiliar skies. They move slowly, but with purpose. You begin to understand that the Mongol Empire is not only a world of grasslands and trees. It is also a vast meeting place, where distant lands quietly touch without ever needing to resemble one another. Silk from the Far East, spices from warm southern ports, metals, stones, fabrics, and ideas carried across thousands of miles, all of it passing through this open land like breath moving across water. The Mongols did not build great stone cities to contain this movement. Instead, they created something far more unusual for their time: safety across distance. On these roads, a traveler could ride for days without fear of sudden attack. That alone changed everything. Merchants no longer moved cautiously from one small kingdom to another, constantly afraid of borders and disputes. Instead, they could travel under a wider protection, crossing regions that once would have been nearly impossible to pass in a single lifetime. As the caravan comes closer, you notice the careful organization of it all. Each animal carries a specific burden. Each bundle is tied with deliberate care. Nothing appears rushed, yet nothing is wasted either. Even the rhythm of movement feels practiced, as if every step has been repeated across countless journeys. A trader greets a passing Mongol rider with quiet familiarity. There is no tension in the exchange, only recognition that both belong to the same vast network of movement. Nearby, a small temporary market begins to form almost naturally. Not a city square, not a built structure, but a moment where paths intersect. Goods are laid out on cloth or wooden platforms. Conversations begin in multiple languages. Sometimes with gestures more than words. You see goods that feel almost unreal in this landscape. Fine silk that catches the wind like water, small carved objects carried carefully through deserts and mountains, bundles of dried spices whose scent lingers in the air long after they are opened. For those living on the steppe, these items are not everyday necessities. But they represent connection to lands that might take months or even years to reach by foot. Yet the most important exchange here is not always material. It is information. News travels with these caravans, a distant ruler rising to power, a conflict far beyond the horizon, a new safety agreement between regions. Even stories, passed from traveler to traveler until they become something larger than truth itself. In a world without newspapers or instant communication, the road becomes a living voice, and the Mongol Empire, with its vast reach, becomes the channel through which that voice can travel farther than ever before. The famous relay system begins to make sense as you observe how quickly riders come and go. Fresh horses are prepared at distant stations, allowing messages to move with surprising speed across immense distances. A single message can cross landscapes that would take weeks for a caravan to travel. It is not magic, it is organization and endurance. As the caravan begins to move onward, leaving behind only faint tracks in the grass, the steppe returns to its quiet rhythm. The market dissolves. The voices fade. The horizon becomes empty again, yet something remains changed. The world no longer feels isolated, it feels connected, as the sun begins to lower once more, casting long golden lines across the grasslands. You realize that these open plains are not empty at all, they are pathways, and every rider, every trader, every messenger is part of something far larger than any single camp could ever contain. but beyond trade and travel lies another question quietly waiting beneath the surface of this vast empire. How does a civilization grow so powerful that even distant lands begin to move in its shadow? Tomorrow, you will begin to understand. The last traces of the caravan from yesterday fade into the distance, leaving behind only silence and wind. The steppe feels different again today. Not emptier, but sharper. The air carries a quiet alertness, as if the land itself is watching, waiting for something subtle to shift. Even the horses seem more attentive, lifting their heads now and then, ears turning toward sounds too distant for human hearing. You are no longer following trade routes. Today, you are following survival. In the Mongol world, hunting is not a pastime reserved for leisure. It is part of the same system that keeps life moving forward. A way to balance scarcity with skill, patience with timing, and knowledge with instinct. The morning begins early. Before the sun fully warms the grasslands, small groups gather without noise or ceremony. Riders check their bows. Arrows are inspected carefully, not for decoration, but for reliability. Horses are chosen not for strength alone, but for temperament, those that can move quietly when needed, and respond instantly when the moment changes. Nothing here is rushed, because rushing on the steppe often means missing what matters. As you move out across the plains, the landscape becomes your only guide. There are no walls, no marked paths, no obvious boundaries. Instead, everything depends on reading subtle signs, the direction of grass bending under wind, the faint prints left in soft soil, the distant movement of birds circling above. The hunters do not speak much, they do not need to. Silence becomes its own language. Hours pass in slow motion. The rhythm of the horse beneath you becomes almost meditative, each step blending into the next. The world feels vast again, but not overwhelming, more like a shared space between observer and land. Then, something changes, a flicker of movement at the edge of sight. A herd appears in the distance, barely visible at first against the golden-green waves of grass. Gazelles move lightly across the plains, their bodies blending with the land until motion reveals them more than shape. The group halts, not suddenly, but like water settling into stillness. Bows are raised slowly. Breath is controlled. Even the wind seems to soften for a moment, as if unwilling to interrupt the fragile balance unfolding across the steppe. But hunting here is not only about the chase, it is about timing and respect. The Mongols understood that survival depended on taking only what was needed. A successful hunt meant food for days, sometimes longer. But overreaching could disrupt the balance of animals that also depended on these grasslands. So decisions were made carefully. A signal passes quietly between riders, and the moment begins. Arrows move through the air in near silence, guided not by force alone, but by years of practiced familiarity. Horses respond instinctively, adjusting their pace, reading the smallest shift in their rider's weight. For a brief moment, everything becomes motion and stillness at once. Then, as quickly as it began, it ends. The herd disappears into the distance, vanishing into the rolling landscape. The hunters lower their bows. There is no celebration, no loud reaction, only acknowledgement. Whatever outcome has come, it is part of a larger rhythm that cannot be controlled, only understood. As the group regathers, the reality of the steppe returns gently. Some hunts bring success, others bring only experience. Both are accepted with the same quiet acceptance. On the ride back, the sun has shifted higher, turning the grasslands into a shimmering sea of light. The wind feels warmer now, carrying the faint scent of earth and dry grass. Somewhere in the distance, a bird calls out, its sound carried endlessly across the open space. You begin to realize that hunting here is not just about food, it is about learning the land in its most honest form, understanding where life hides, where it moves, and where it chooses, sometimes, to reveal itself for only a moment before disappearing again into the endless horizon. As the camp slowly comes back into view, smoke rising gently from familiar fires, you sense a shift waiting ahead in the story of this empire. Because beyond survival and trade, beyond horses and discipline, there is another force that shaped everything you have seen so far, the movement of people across impossible distances, and tomorrow, you will follow that path, the path that carried riders farther than most empires ever dreamed of reaching. The steppe is never truly still, even when no caravan passes, even when no riders appear on the horizon. There is always movement, grass bending under unseen winds, clouds drifting slowly across an endless sky, horses shifting their weight as they rest. But today, that movement takes shape again. A rider appears in the distance, then another, and another. Soon, it becomes clear that this is not a hunting group, and not a small family journey. This is something far more structured. Almost like a living system stretching across the entire empire, messengers, travelers, riders who seem to belong everywhere and nowhere at the same time. They move with purpose, but without hesitation. As if the distance itself has no authority over them, you begin to see how the Mongol Empire handles what most civilizations struggle with most. Communication across impossible space. In many lands, news travels slowly. Weeks can pass before a message crosses even a modest territory. But here, across the vast Mongolian and Eurasian landscapes, movement has been refined into something precise, a rhythm of exchange. As you follow the riders, you notice small stations appearing at intervals along the land. Simple posts. Quiet places where horses are kept ready, fed, and rested. There is no grand architecture, no stone towers or decorated gates, only function. A rider arrives, dismounts briefly, transfers messages or goods, steps onto a fresh horse, and continues without delay. The process feels almost seamless, like breathing. This system allows the empire to stretch across thousands of miles while still acting as one connected organism. Information that would normally take weeks or months can move with surprising speed, carried forward by a chain of riders who each travel only a portion of the journey. No single person sees the entire distance, but together, they make it possible. As you continue watching, the scale of this becomes clearer. A message may begin near the grasslands you have already traveled. It might speak of trade, or weather, or distant political shifts. From there, it moves east toward older cities, or west toward foreign kingdoms that barely understand the land it comes from. Each rider becomes a temporary guardian of that message. Not owning it, not altering it, only carrying it forward. There is a kind of trust built into this system that feels unusual for such a vast and mobile world. The strength of the empire does not come from walls or borders, but from reliability repeated countless times across distance. And yet, despite all this structure, the journey itself remains deeply human. A rider pauses briefly at a stream, letting the horse drink. Another adjusts a worn saddle under shifting sunlight. Someone quietly eats dried food while scanning the horizon for the next station. There is fatigue, yes, but also familiarity. This is a life measured in miles, not minutes. As the day moves forward, you begin to understand why horses are treated with such quiet respect. Without them, this entire system collapses. Not dramatically, not suddenly, but silently, as distance reclaims control over everything. The horse is not just transportation, it is continuity, it is time made visible. Far ahead, a rider disappears over a gentle rise in the land, swallowed by the curve of the earth itself. It feels almost symbolic, as if the steppe is constantly accepting and releasing these figures, never holding them for long. They come, they pass, they continue, and life moves with them. By late afternoon, the light begins to soften again, stretching long shadows across the grasslands. The wind carries a cooler edge now, hinting at the quiet transition between day and evening. Another station appears in the distance, another exchange, another continuation of something much larger than any single journey. You realize that no matter how far you travel here, you are never truly outside the system. You are always inside it, connected by invisible threads of movement, trust, and repetition. And as the riders fade once more into the horizon, carrying messages toward places you may never see, a new question begins to form quietly in your mind. What kind of leadership allows such a vast world to remain connected without falling apart? The answer waits just beyond the next horizon, and tomorrow you will begin to see the forces behind it. The steppe carries a strange kind of silence today, not the peaceful silence of dawn, not the calm hush of night, but something heavier. As if even the wind is moving more carefully than usual, you notice it first in the behavior of people. Conversations are shorter. Movements are more deliberate. Even the horses seem unusually calm, standing close together as if sensing an invisible tension in the air. In a world this vast and open, where people are often scattered across miles of grassland, order cannot rely on walls or locks, it relies on understanding and consequence. The Mongol Empire was known for its mobility, its speed, its reach across continents. But beneath that movement existed a strict expectation. Once rules were understood, they were to be followed, not for ceremony, but for survival. You begin to see how law here is less like a distant institution and more like a shared agreement between families, clans, and travelers who must rely on each other in a land that offers no protection on its own. If someone steals from a neighbor, it is not just property that is lost, it is trust, and trust, on the steppe, is far harder to rebuild than any broken object. Disputes are not ignored. They are brought forward, often in the presence of elders or appointed authorities who listen carefully, not in haste, but with deliberate attention. Every detail matters, because decisions ripple outward through families who may depend on one another again tomorrow. There is no room for careless judgment. Punishments, when they come, are not random or emotional. They are structured to restore balance. Sometimes through compensation. Sometimes through service. In more severe cases, separation from the community itself becomes the consequence. Not because the land is cruel, but because survival depends on cohesion. As you travel further with a small group of riders, you hear stories shared quietly along the way. A trader who failed to honor an agreement and lost future access to key routes. A herder who neglected responsibilities and faced penalties affecting their entire household. A traveler who violated trust and found themselves unable to rely on others in future journeys. None of these stories are told loudly. They are not meant to entertain, they are meant to remind. On the steppe, reputation is not abstract. It travels faster than caravans, carried through memory, conversation, and observation. A single act can follow someone for years, shaping how others choose to interact with them. In a world without written records accessible to everyone, people become the record. Yet, despite this firmness, there is a balance that might surprise an outsider. Forgiveness exists, restoration is possible, those who make mistakes are not always cast away immediately. Many are given opportunities to correct their actions, to restore what was lost, to demonstrate reliability again through time and effort, because complete exclusion is rarely useful in a place where every capable hand matters. As the day continues, you pass a small gathering near a shallow valley. Nothing dramatic is happening. No trial, no public punishment. Only a quiet discussion among elders and a few families seated on the grass, speaking in calm but serious tones. The atmosphere is reflective rather than harsh, like a system constantly trying to maintain balance rather than exert dominance. You begin to understand something subtle. Law here is not separate from daily life. It is embedded within it, in how people treat each other, in how they share resources, in how they remember promises made under open skies. Even the weather seems to echo this idea. Unpredictable, yet followed closely. Respected, studied, and adapted to rather than resisted. As evening approaches, the group you have been traveling with stops near a river bank. Horses drink quietly. Fires are prepared with familiar routine. The sky above begins to shift into the soft colors of late light, and as you sit near the edge of the water, watching its slow movement, a thought begins to settle in your mind. Power in the Mongol Empire was not maintained only through expansion or speed, it was maintained through structure. Through expectations quietly understood by everyone who lived beneath this vast sky. And yet, as you listen to the distant sound of hooves fading into the horizon, you sense that discipline alone does not explain everything you have seen so far. There is something deeper still shaping this world. Something tied not just to rules, but to belief itself, and tomorrow, you will step into that quieter, unseen layer of life on the steppe, where the invisible world begins to guide the visible one. The night from the previous camp lingers in memory. Fading slowly like mist dissolving into morning light, dawn arrives quietly over the steppe. No bells. No towers. No distant call from stone walls, only the wind. Moving across endless grass, as if it has always known the shape of this land. Inside the camp, life begins in the same gentle rhythm as always. Fire is rekindled. Horses are checked. Water is gathered. But beneath these familiar actions, something deeper quietly exists, something that cannot be seen, but is always felt. On the Mongol steppe, belief is not contained within temples. There are no grand cathedrals rising into the sky. No carved halls filled with statues. Instead, the sacred lives within the land itself. The sky above becomes the highest presence, the earth beneath becomes a living foundation, and everything in between is part of a larger, unseen order. You notice it in the way people pause before long journeys, a quiet moment. A hand resting briefly on the saddle. A glance toward the open horizon, as if acknowledging something beyond words, not fear, not ritual in the formal sense, but respect. The Mongols believed the world was alive with forces that shaped fortune, weather, and fate. The sky was vast and watching. The earth was steady and listening. And the wind carried messages that could not be fully understood, only sensed. In the center of camp life, small traditions appear naturally. A bundle of milk is offered toward the open air before drinking. A fire is treated with care, never wasted or disrespected. When a horse stumbles, people pause for a moment of silence, as if recognizing the fragile balance between survival and loss. These actions are not performed for show, they are part of how life is understood. You walk with the group later in the day, passing open plains where nothing interrupts the horizon. Somewhere far in the distance, birds circle slowly above invisible currents of air. The sky feels closer here, as if it leans down toward the earth rather than staying distant. An elder rider speaks softly beside you, not explaining doctrine, not defining rules, but sharing observations passed down through generations, that certain winds feel different before storms arrive, that dreams sometimes carry warnings, that the land itself remembers those who travel across it with respect, and those who do not. Whether these beliefs are literal or symbolic does not seem to matter. What matters is how deeply they are woven into everyday awareness. As evening approaches, the camp settles once again. The fire burns low. Shadows stretch long across the grass. Above, the first stars begin to appear, one by one, as if being carefully placed into the sky. There is no separation between sacred and ordinary here. Cooking dinner, caring for horses, listening to elders. All of it exists within the same quiet framework of meaning. Even silence feels intentional, as you lie back near the edge of the firelight, watching the vast dome of stars slowly fill the night. You begin to understand something subtle. On the steppe, belief is not something you visit, it is something you live inside, and as sleep begins to settle once more over the land, you sense that these unseen ideas are not separate from power, or survival, or discipline. They are part of the same invisible thread holding everything together, and tomorrow you will see how those threads extend even further, into the forces that shaped conquest itself. The night sky from yesterday slowly fades into a colder kind of silence, a silence that feels different, heavier, more aware. As dawn approaches, the steppe is no longer just open land stretching endlessly in every direction. It begins to feel like something connected. Something moving beneath the surface, unseen but constant. You have traveled through camps, caravans, hunting grounds, and distant relay routes, but today, the world feels like it is beginning to align toward a single center. The name is not spoken loudly at first, it arrives quietly, through conversations that pause for a moment before continuing, through glances that carry meaning without needing explanation. Then, eventually, it is spoken. Genghis Khan, to distant kingdoms, he is a figure wrapped in fear and legend, but here, within the lived reality of the steppe, he is something more complex. Something less distant, a force that reshaped how people moved, organized, and survived. As you travel with a group of riders, you begin to notice how order feels different under his influence. Not rigid like stone walls, but wide, structured, and mobile, like the land itself has been given direction without being confined. The empire does not feel like a single city, it feels like motion made stable. Along the path, you pass groups of soldiers and messengers moving with quiet discipline. They are not chaotic. They are not shouting. Instead, there is a calm efficiency to everything they do, as if every movement has been refined through repetition across vast distances. Even strangers share a strange sense of connection, a shared understanding that the same system carries them all forward. You stop briefly near a gathering point where travelers exchange information and rest. There is no sense of fear here, but there is awareness, an understanding that structure exists beyond the horizon, even if it is not visible at every moment. Stories circulate softly, of distant lands brought under control, of rivers crossed that once seemed impassable, of cities that resisted and then changed. But within these stories, there is always another layer. Not just conquest, but coordination. Not just expansion, but organization on a scale few had ever attempted before. As you continue riding, the landscape itself seems unchanged, yet your perception of it shifts. The same hills now feel like pathways. The same rivers feel like connections rather than barriers. The empire does not replace the steppe, it moves through it. Later in the day, you come across a group of officials managing movement along a route. Horses are checked. Messages are passed forward. Travelers are guided toward stations where fresh animals wait. Everything operates with a calm precision that feels almost invisible when working correctly. No grand speeches, no dramatic displays, just continuity, and that is what begins to stand out most. This empire does not rely on constant force to be felt, it relies on systems that repeat themselves so consistently that they become part of the landscape. As evening approaches, you stop near a rise in the land. From here, the steppe stretches endlessly, but now it feels less empty than before. It feels organized, even in its openness. You begin to understand that what you have been moving through is not just geography, it is structure spread across distance, and somewhere within that structure, leadership is not simply a distant figure on a throne, it is something present in every rider, every station, every coordinated movement across the horizon. As the sky darkens once more, the wind carries a faint chill, and you sense that you are moving closer to the center of this vast system, not geographically, but historically, because tomorrow, you will finally begin to see how power itself is maintained across an empire too large for walls and too mobile for cities to contain. After the long stretch of movement, discipline, and quiet survival, the steppe feels different today, not softer, but lighter, as if the land itself is briefly exhaling. You notice it first in the sounds, laughter carried farther than usual across the grasslands. Horses moving more freely, not hurried by urgency. Small groups gathering not for travel, not for work, but for something that feels closer to pause, a rare moment in a life defined by motion. Festivals on the Mongol steppe do not arrive with fixed calendars carved into stone. They follow seasons, victories, successful migrations, or simply the moment when a community decides to come together, and when they do, the entire rhythm of life shifts. Villages appear in clusters where before there was only open land. Smoke rises in multiple places at once, drifting upward into a sky that seems to watch quietly from above. Horses are tied loosely, not prepared for travel, but for rest. There is no rush in the air, only presence. You walk among the gathering and begin to notice how different this world feels when survival is not the immediate concern. People who were once focused on distance and duty now sit closer together, speaking in longer sentences, allowing stories to unfold without interruption. Children move freely between groups, their energy uncontained by expectation. Elders sit with relaxed posture, watching more than directing. Even the wind seems gentler, moving through the tall grass in slow, unhurried waves. Music begins without announcement. A stringed instrument is passed from one person to another, its worn surface carrying the marks of countless hands before it. The sound it produces is not loud or polished in the modern sense, but it carries something deeper. Something rooted in memory rather than performance. A voice joins in. Then another. Soon, the air is filled with layered sound, melodies that rise and fall like the land itself, shaped not by formal composition, but by repetition across generations. Dancing follows naturally, not choreographed. Not rehearsed, but responsive. Feet moving over the earth in patterns shaped by rhythm and emotion rather than instruction. The movements are grounded, connected to the land beneath them, as if every step acknowledges the surface it touches. Food is shared without calculation, meat prepared slowly over open fire. Fermented mare's milk passed from hand to hand. Simple foods that carry the weight of necessity in everyday life, now transformed by the presence of community into something closer to celebration. You realize that nothing about the food has changed, only the context has. As evening approaches, the festival does not diminish, it deepens. Firelight spreads across the camp like scattered stars fallen to earth. Shadows move gently between us. Conversations overlap without confusion, forming a quiet hum that fills the space between silence and sound. Somewhere nearby, an elder tells a story, not of conquest, not of war, but of weather remembered from childhood, of journeys taken before borders mattered, of animals that once led travelers safely through storms. The listener does not interrupt, no one does, because here, stories are not entertainment alone, they are continuity. As night settles fully over the gathering, the sky above becomes familiar again, vast, unchanged, patient. But below it, something human has been briefly allowed to expand, connection without urgency, joy without excess, rest without distance, and as the firelight slowly fades into deeper darkness, you begin to understand something subtle about the Mongol world. Strength is not only measured in endurance or discipline, it is also measured in the ability to pause and still remain whole. Tomorrow, the steppe will return to its usual rhythm. The festival's warmth from yesterday still lingers in memory. But the steppe has already returned to its quiet discipline. Morning light spreads slowly across the grasslands, revealing a world that feels once again in motion. Horses are being prepared. Saddles checked. Supplies quietly organized. Conversations are shorter now, shaped by purpose rather than celebration. It feels like the land has shifted gears. You begin to notice a pattern that has been building across everything you have seen so far. Nothing in this world stands still for long, and that may be the key to understanding how the Mongols expanded across such impossible distances. It was never one single reason. It was a combination of habits, environment, and the way life itself shaped people long before they ever reached a battlefield. You already know the steppe teaches movement. Families do not stay in one place. Resources change with the seasons. Weather demands constant adaptation. Even survival depends on the ability to relocate quickly without losing structure. Over time, this creates a very specific kind of thinking. Flexibility becomes normal. Change becomes expected. As you ride with a group of travelers, you start to see how this mindset translates beyond daily life. When challenges appear, the response is rarely to build something permanent in one place. Instead, it is to adjust, reorganize, and move forward in a new formation. There is efficiency in this, but also freedom. Another factor becomes clear as the landscape stretches endlessly ahead of you. Distance does not feel like a barrier here in the same way it does in settled lands. On the steppe, distance is simply part of life. Something to be crossed, not feared. Horses turn vast emptiness into manageable journeys. Riders grow comfortable with horizons that would overwhelm others, where some civilizations saw isolation. The Mongols saw reach. You pass a small group of riders exchanging messages at a station. The process is fast, almost routine. Fresh horses. Quick handover. Immediate departure. There is no hesitation, no delay, no need to pause and rebuild intention. Continuity is already built into the system, and then there is unity, not uniformity, but connection. Different clans, different regions, different groups, all moving under shared expectations. Not everyone lives the same way, but many understand the same rhythms: how to travel, how to cooperate, how to respond when distance is no longer an obstacle. As these patterns align, something larger emerges, an ability to coordinate across vast territories without relying on slow, centralized control. But there is another layer beneath all of this. One that becomes clearer as you listen to stories from riders who have come from far beyond the horizon. Speed, not just of movement, but of decision. In many empires, decisions must travel upward, pause, then travel back down. Here, much of that delay is reduced by design. Information flows through established routes, carried by people who already know how to act when they arrive. It is not chaos, it is practiced responsiveness. As evening approaches, you stop on a gentle rise overlooking the endless grasslands. The sky is wide and pale, slowly shifting toward the soft colors of dusk. Somewhere far away, tiny silhouettes of riders move along faint paths, almost disappearing into the horizon. From this distance, the empire does not look like borders drawn on a map. It looks like movement itself, flowing, expanding, adjusting, alive. And as you sit there in silence, watching the wind ripple across the grass like waves across water, a quiet realization begins to settle in. The Mongols did not simply conquer through force alone. They moved in a way the world around them was not prepared for, and anything that could move faster, adapt quicker, and connect wider than its neighbors would naturally reshape everything it touched. But even now, as the story seems to approach its height, one final question remains unanswered. What happens when an empire built on movement meets the limits of the world it is moving through? Tomorrow, you will reach the edge of that question and begin to see the fragile balance behind everything you have witnessed so far. Night has fully settled over the steppe, but it does not feel like an ending, it feels like a pause. Between breaths, the fire beside you burns low, its last embers glowing softly against the darkness. Around it, the familiar shapes of Shah stand quietly, like patient silhouettes holding their place beneath an endless sky. Horses rest nearby, their outlines barely visible in the dim light, occasionally shifting as the wind passes through the grass. Everything is calm, almost too calm. After everything you have witnessed, you have traveled through survival and discipline, through weather and movement, through trade routes that stretched beyond imagination and families that carried entire worlds inside a single circular home. You have seen how people live where nothing is fixed, where every day depends on adaptation, awareness, and quiet endurance. And now, at the end of it all, a simple question lingers in the air. Would you truly survive here? At first, the question seems easy to answer. You might think of strength, or toughness, or the ability to endure cold and distance. But the longer you sit with it, the more it begins to change shape, because survival here was never just about physical endurance, it was about understanding rhythm, the rhythm of movement across land that never stays still, the rhythm of seasons that decide when to travel and when to remain, the rhythm of animals that determine wealth, safety, and continuity, even the rhythm of silence itself. When speaking too much could mean missing what the land is trying to tell you, as the firelight flickers, you begin to remember each part of the journey not as separate events, but as layers of the same world. The harsh weather that shaped every decision, the horses that turned distance into possibility, the discipline that held families together without written laws, the beliefs that gave meaning to sky, wind, and earth, the trade routes that carried voices across continents, and the riders who made distance feel almost irrelevant. None of these elements worked alone, they formed a system. Invisible when viewed from the outside, but deeply interconnected when lived from within. You realize that surviving here was not about conquering the steppe, it was about learning to belong to it. As the night deepens, the stars above begin to feel closer again. not in distance, but in presence. The sky is not empty. It is full, watching, constant, unchanged across every chapter you have traveled through. Somewhere far beyond the horizon you have followed, empires rise and fall in stone cities, but here, life continues in motion, not paused by permanence, not trapped by walls, just carried forward by rhythm, memory, and adaptation. The fire finally softens into glowing ash, the wind moves gently across the grasslands one last time, as if closing a book that was never meant to end, and in that quiet moment, a final thought settles, not as an answer, but as an echo. Perhaps the question was never whether you could survive the Mongol Empire. Perhaps the real question is whether any life built on stillness could ever truly understand a world built on movement. As your eyes grow heavy and the steppe fades into darkness, there is no final conclusion. Only continuation somewhere beyond the horizon, because history, like the wind across these grasslands, never truly stops, it only moves on.